Studies show that over 90% of relationships in America are codependent behavior. Do you want to know if this is you or your partner? Listen up to find out.
We're going to cover in this video 5 symptoms of codependent behavior. The first being having a people pleasing attitude. And this is something that I really feel like is probably a lot of people until you come to this realization. But people pleasing actually winds up hurting you and your partner because you're not being your authentic self. So people pleasing would be signing yourself up for things that you really don't enjoy doing. And this is a good way to lose sight of who you really are. And so if you're doing that over the course of a relationship, especially if this is a relationship of you and your significant other, it confuses your partner because they wind up thinking that you like doing certain things and you are a certain way, when really deep down, you're actually starting to harbor feelings of bitterness and resentment, which this always winds up turning into something much more toxic down the road, because eventually that's all going to blow up.
Yes, that's so good, Sybil. And so, also in codependent relationships, it's super easy, with that said, to lose sight of boundaries. When you have codependent traits, you have a tendency to seek people that need to be fixed or require you to look after them. And this happens, and you just start to, really look to your partner's needs more than you look to your own needs. And a lot of this starts in childhood. It's wounds that can lead to stressful and dysfunctional behaviors, and it causes you to start to display these behaviors. When you're in a codependent relationship, the codependents, they actually recognize that they have boundaries, but they have a hard time setting them. So, like Sybil talked about, with saying yes to things that they don't really want to do, they will also overlook boundaries to please the other person. And this is just really unhealthy, toxic sort of behavior for that person and also for the other person involved.
That is really true. I feel like these really stack on top of each other, and you can really see the overlap as we're going through all of these codependent behavior examples. Next up would really, this is a big one. And I feel like this is one of the, not only is this a really big one that contributes to codependent behaviors, but it's one of the easiest to fix, which we'll talk about a little later, but lack of self-love. If you do not love yourself, you are putting out that energy, and it's really hard to then get somebody else to give you that love that you need, because maybe they're confused because you have that people pleasing attitude and you haven't set boundaries. And I just feel like this really starts the snowball of a really non-functioning or not healthy functioning relationship. But the example that I visually see in my head when I think about a lack of self-love is that you are trying to pour from an empty cup, which is really hard, impossible to do. But also on the flip side of that, if you aren't loving yourself and filling yourself up with that and knowing that you are a person worthy of love, what's going to happen is your partner is going to try to pour into you. And it's like there's a hole in the bottom of your cup. And so that becomes really draining on your partner, because they, if you're seeking them to fill you up, but you've got a hole in the bottom, and they just continually give to you, and it's just going right through, because really self-love is kind of the plug at the bottom that helps you hold on to your own feelings and harboring those good feelings for yourself, but then allowing others to pour that into you as well, and you actually being able to retain that. So that's the visual that I see when I think about lack of self-love, but it is a really important part of being in a relationship. And if you're practicing, whether you know it or not, these symptoms of codependency, this is usually one of those key points that is missing.
Yes, absolutely. I loved your point about how all of these kind of stack onto each other, because the next one is poor communication. And so that actually stems from a lack of self-love. And it seems like those two don't really go together. But when you don't have good communication, it makes you unhappy, and then it diminishes your self-esteem. It provokes or prevents healthy emotional growth. So having good communication is key in a relationship, and that is being able to listen to your partner, for them to listen to you and understand, and not sit there and think about what's the next thing that I'm going to say to what they're talking about, and how can I relate myself to that. It's truly sitting back and really just listening to your partner and just being able to feel comfortable enough to express your own opinions and not worry about what the other person is going to say. So someone that is codependent won't share their real feelings or their real emotions because they're afraid of what the other person's going to think, or that the other person's going to leave them because of the way they feel, or all of these just toxic thoughts. And it stems from that low self-esteem and low self-confidence. And so that just really leads to, a toxic relationship overall. And so some good communication tips that I wanted to give you is listening, like I said, is super important. Assertiveness. Assertiveness can sound like aggressiveness almost, but it's not. It's just being firm and like how you feel and what you want in life and knowing what that is. And using I instead of you. I is just more powerful than saying, you make me feel this way, you did this, coming at a person like that. So that's also good. And then consideration and understanding is key, I think, with communication as well.
Oh, I love that. Those are great tips. And communication really goes a long ways in a relationship. Now, looking at the final symptom that we're going to share, and of course, this is not an all inclusive list, but these are really the 5 things that we see often rearing their ugly heads in a codependent relationship. But once you get to the larger end of the snowball, now that we've come through, having that people pleasing attitude, you don't have the boundaries, you're not loving yourself, and you don't have great communication skills, what happens? You wind up being really reactive. And this is kind of the spearhead of the toxicity in the relationship, because you haven't been authentic to yourself. You haven't been speaking up for yourself. You haven't been exuding that love for yourself. And then you get to this point where it's just like, because you've been in that state for so long, and now you're at this point where it's just like it's triggering you. We can only stay inauthentic to ourselves for so long until it really just like self combusts, and we find ourselves usually having kind of a nasty attitude. And it's really important to notice these signs before you get to this state, but oftentimes this is where we get to, and then we start to realize, okay, this relationship isn't working, and it's kind of the time when you need to take some self accountability for how you've not performed on those other levels. And just being reactive is not the state to be in. You want to be proactive in a relationship. You want to be able to communicate clearly with your partner about how you're feeling, about what your boundaries are. And if you can't do any of those things, it's just going to create the state, usually between both partners, where you're both just being reactive because nobody took the time to be proactive and solve some of these things before it got to this point. So now we're going to kind of shift in and maybe give you guys a little insight on how you can catch yourself and correct some of these things. So Alana, do you ever catch yourself falling into codependent behaviors? Like, what were some of the things that, if you have been there, how have you overcome that?
I was reflecting as I was, doing a little research on this topic, and I was reflecting on a past relationship that I was in that was definitely codependent. I was younger, and, we were both young, and it was just wrapping ourselves up in each other and losing sight of our own identity and who we were as individuals. And yes, when you become, 2 into 1, and you're in that mode of you're getting married and you're going to become 2 into 1, that's not what it means to lose sight of like who you are and what your identity is. It's like you're both still individuals, and that is super important to remember that. So I know for me in the past, it was, not being able to express my feelings or emotions because I was so dependent on the other person, and they were so dependent on me, that we were both had that fear that we were going to say something wrong or do something wrong. It was almost like walking on eggshells, and it was really just really hard to deal with. And I think in my current relationship that it can be easy to start to move into some of those points that we've covered just in a normal relationship, friendships, whatever it is, love relationships. Those are just some things to be aware of. So I think if you have the awareness and you recognize that, hey, we could be moving into this, what can we do to like fix that and get back on track? So I think that is for me a way in my current relationship to try to keep it healthy and try to just stay on track with being, keeping our own identities.
I love that, because really that is how that awareness around it allows you to be proactive rather than reactive, and start to notice some of those signs. I love that. And for me, honestly, I think I used to be such a people pleaser, and I do think a lot of these things become more obvious, or you become more aware to it as you mature and you go through different relationships and you see kind of how you were, what didn't work, and you can kind of calculate some of that. But for people who are in relationships for the first time, I hope that this will give you guys some insight into some of the signs to be aware of, because if you go into things, and for me, I was always the one who I wanted to be the fixer, I wanted to be the helper, I wanted to be the people pleaser. And I've just learned over the years that that isn't healthy for myself, and it isn't healthy for anybody that I am in a relationship with either. It doesn't bring the best foot forward for myself or anybody else. So I really think that through the ages and going through different relationships, you can kind of start to have more awareness around these different areas, and make sure that you are not exhibiting these symptoms of being codependent, so that you can have a strong and healthy relationship and be two individuals who can come together as one.
Yes, I love that. That's awesome. So if you found this video helpful, subscribe with the notification bell and hit that like button down below and comment.
We will see you guys next time on the journey from isolation to community, where freedom awaits beyond. Join us as we drop a new video every Wednesday as well.